I had typed that number 1,000 times, not this morning, not with shaking hands. With the same flat efficiency I brought to every batch audit, coffee going cold on the left, space heater clicking under my desk, Morgantown gray and exhausted outside my window the way it always is in February. The results populated at 9:47 a.m. I read the line once, then again. Then I noticed I had stopped breathing. My name was there. Deirdre Ann Calloway, co-owner of record, tax obligation, paid in full, 7 consecutive years, total remitted, $31,840. And below that, a line I had never seen, Lisa Simon, recorded the 14th of March 2018, Allegheny Gas Partners, lessee, Briar Ridge Holdings, LLC, lessor, annual rent, $8,200. 2 signatures, Gerald T. Calloway, Loretta M. Calloway, not mine. I am 36 years old. I am a property tax auditor for Monongalia County, West Virginia. My job, the job I have done every day for 8 years, is to find exactly this kind of discrepancy in other people's records. For 7 years, I paid $31,840 in property taxes on land. My parents had secretly leased to a gas company, collected $49,200 in rent through an LLC. They helped my brother set up and never said one word to me about any of it. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please like and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything to me. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I genuinely want to know. My name is Deirdre. I'm 36. I work at the Monongalia County Courthouse on Spruce Street in Morgantown, West Virginia. I read land records for a living. I find the things people hide in paperwork. It turns out I'd been hiding from my own. This is the story of 7 years I spent paying for land my family was quietly profiting from, and the September afternoon when I stood on that land, looked my mother in the eye, and told her exactly what I knew. To understand how I got to that Wednesday morning, I have to take you back to a Sunday afternoon in September 2017. I was in the kitchen of my apartment on Willie Street, $847 a month, second floor, a view of a parking lot, and one very large oak tree, making coffee when my phone rang. My mother. Not at her usual 2 p.m. Sunday slot, earlier, which I noticed. There's an opportunity with the land, she said. A company wants to lease the mineral rights, natural gas. The rent would be $8,200 a year. Do you want to be involved? I said I needed to think about it. 3 days later, I called back and said I wanted to see the contract first. She said, Dad already signed. It's done, honey. I held the phone. Okay, I said. I made dinner. I went to bed. I did not pull that thread. I want you to remember that moment, not because that's when the betrayal happened, though it was, but because that was the moment I had the question in my hand and I put it down. That was my choice. I'm going to be honest about that because the honest version of this story has me in it too. My apartment on Willie Street was the first thing I'd ever had that was entirely mine. I knew which floorboard creaked near the bathroom. I knew the water heater took exactly 4 minutes, 20 seconds to run warm. I knew the circuit breaker would trip if I ran the space heater and the hairdryer at the same time. In 2017, I was making $54,700 a year. After taxes, rent, car, insurance, and utilities, I had about $890 a month left over. I hadn't been to the dentist in 2 years. I hadn't taken a real vacation since 2015. On Mueller, I drove a car with 140,000 miles on it and told myself I'd replace it next year. Nobody in my family knew those numbers. I never told them. And I want to be honest about why, because telling them would have required me to admit that I was giving money I didn't easily have to people who had never once asked what I could afford. I started paying property taxes on my grandfather's 47 acres in November 2016. Walton Calloway, my grandfather, had cleared that land in the early 1960s. When he died in 2015, he left it to my father with one condition spelled out in the deed. The land would pass equally to me and my brother Brody when my parents were gone, provided each of us maintained our share of the annual tax obligation. If either of us paid continuously for 7 years, we earned the right to buy out the other's share at fair market value. I read that deed in the attorney's office the week of the funeral. I read it twice. I went home and I started a blue folder labeled Timesland Grandpa. Brody never paid a single year. I know now why he didn't need to. My mother, Loretta, is what people in Morgantown call good-hearted. She brings food when there's a death on the street. She calls every Sunday at exactly 2 p.m. Always exactly 2, always 12 to 15 minutes, not a second more, as though she had set a timer she'd never told anyone about. When I was 8 years old, I brought home a spelling test. Perfect score. She looked at it and said, "Good job, honey." Then my brother walked in, Brody, 6 years old, holding a finger painting he'd done at school, and she knelt down to his level and looked at that painting like it was the most important thing she had ever seen. Her whole face opened. Her voice went soft and warm and present in a way it had not been 30 seconds before. I stood there holding my test. I was 8. I didn't have words for what I understood in that moment, but I learned it anyway. My competence was expected. His effort was celebrated. Those are not the same thing, and a child knows the difference even when she has no language for it. Over the next 28 years, I kept learning that lesson in different rooms and different versions. At the Thanksgiving table, when my father asked Brody about his job and turned to me only when a question required someone who could do math. At my college graduation, which my parents attended and applauded at, and which was never mentioned at a family dinner again. At my brother's high school graduation, where a teacher pulled my mother aside and said something I couldn't hear, and my mother smiled and touched the woman's arm and said he does his best, and then looked across the gym at Brody with an expression I can only describe as times relief, not pride, relief. Like she had been afraid he wouldn't make it, and he had, and now she could breathe. I had graduated cum laude 2 years earlier. Nobody looked relieved. I am not saying this to make my brother a villain. Brody is 33 years old. He lives 4 minutes from my parents, drives a new F-150, hosts the family on Labor Day because he has a big yard. He once asked me at dinner what my job actually did in practice, not to learn the answer, but the way people ask about weather when they've run out of other subjects. But here is what I also have to say, because this story won't be true if I don't. There were things Brody couldn't do that I could. He couldn't sit with an elderly homeowner being defrauded and explain calmly why the contract was unenforceable. He couldn't read a parcel report and find the problem in 30 seconds. When my father got sick in 2020 and needed someone to sit with the doctor and ask the right questions, Dad called me. Brody knew that about himself. I don't know what he did with it over the years. I have some idea now. My father, Gerald, is a man who has opinions about everything and considers explaining them optional. He worked at a machine shop near Sabreton for 30 years. He could read weather by the way snow melted in February. He knew the name of every dirt road in this county. And when he talked about my grandfather's 47 acres, always times that land, never times the property, his voice changed in a way it didn't for anything else. Something in it that sounded like legacy or obligation or the particular pride of a man who was raised to carry things without mentioning the weight. Here is what I now understand about my father. He made decisions about that land the same way he made all decisions efficiently, without consultation. With the confidence of a man who has never had to explain himself to anyone who had the standing to push back. He did not think of me as someone who had that standing. That is not cruelty. That is something more banal than cruelty, and in some ways harder to argue with. Now let me tell you about the money, because the money is the evidence, and I need you to understand it not as a list of transactions, but as a sequence of choices I made while believing something that wasn't true. November 2016, first tax payment, $4,240. I wrote the check at my kitchen table, filed the receipt in the blue folder, and felt something close to pride. I was honoring my grandfather's wishes. I was doing the right thing. No one in my family acknowledged it. November 2017, $4,320. That same fall, my parents' roof was leaking. My father mentioned it on the phone the way he mentioned everything, matter-of-factly, without inflection, in the same tone he would use to describe road construction on Route 7. The repair was going to be $3,190. I transferred $1,500 to their account the following week. I told myself it was temporary. No one offered to pay me back. I didn't ask. November 2018, $4,420. I was still driving my 2011 Honda with 152,000 miles on it. I had been telling myself since 2017 that I would replace it next year. Next year kept moving. November 2019, $4,480. My brother texted the family group chat a photo of a new leather couch, cognac brown. My mother responded with 3 heart emojis. My father sent a thumbs up. I was at my kitchen table when the notifications came through. I had just written the tax check. I stared at my phone for a moment. Then I put it face down and finished my coffee. Have you ever done everything right and still felt like you were the only one keeping score? Drop a yes or a no in the comments. November 2020 and 2021, $4,610 and $4,780. By this point, I had paid over $26,000 in total. I had also paid for 2 of my parents' car repairs, helped cover a medical bill after my father's hospitalization, and lent Brody $600 after he said he was short this month, a loan he has never mentioned again. The total, by the end of year 7, $31,840. I want to say that number out loud and let it sit there. $31,840. That is not just a number. That is the dentist I didn't see for 2 years. That is the car I held together with prayers and a mechanic on Beechhurst Avenue. That is the trip I promised myself I would take someday. That someday kept being pushed. That I stopped scheduling somewhere around 2020 because I had stopped believing in the version of my life where there was room for something just for me. $31,840 paid into something I believed was mine, into a future I was building with both hands, while 6 miles away, a separate future was being built with my name left off the paperwork. There was one moment, Easter 2021, when I almost said something. We were at my parents' house on Kingwood Pike, the same house I grew up in, the same aluminum screen door that never latched right, the same azaleas blooming violent pink in the front yard. My father was talking about the land with the proprietary ease of a man discussing his own portfolio. He said the arrangement had been working out well. I looked up. Brody was reaching for the rolls. He did not look at me. What arrangement? I asked. My father looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. Not evasive, not guilty, just assessing the way he looked at anything that needed to be categorized, and then said, the lease. The gas company. It's running smooth. How much are they paying? I said, a pause. Enough, my father said, and that was it. That was the end of that conversation. He said, time's enough times, like a door closing, and the door closed, and I sat there on the other side of it with my fork in my hand. I looked at my mother. She was looking at her plate. I put my fork down. I felt something move in my chest, not anger yet, something quieter, like the particular feeling when you've been reading a report for 10 minutes and you realize you've been looking at the wrong column, that cold, specific clarity. But I picked my fork back up. I ate my ham. I drove home. I told myself I didn't know enough yet to do anything. The truth, which I found out later in the particular company of a yellow legal pad at 2 inches the morning, was that I knew enough. I chose not to act because acting would have required me to know officially, irreversibly, that the family I had been financing for 7 years had been treating me like a fixture. Something load-bearing and therefore something no one thought to consult. I wasn't ready for that math. Not yet. The February morning it finally happened. I was running a standard batch audit, 43 parcels in the eastern section of the county, the kind of work I could do in my sleep. Parcel 31004100017 came up on page 2. I clicked through out of habit. The lease assignment record loaded. I read it once. My hands went still on the keyboard. I looked out the window. There was a woman walking a dog in the courthouse parking lot. The dog was sniffing something near a parking meter. The woman waited with complete patience. I watched them for a moment with the total focus of someone whose mind has just gone very, very quiet. Then I typed Times Briar Ridge Holdings LLC Times into the West Virginia Secretary of State Registry. Registered agent Brody Allen Calloway. Date of incorporation, the 28th of February, 2018. 14 days before the lease was signed. I pushed back from my desk, not standing up, just creating distance. I went downstairs to the records room. Paulette Drisker was at the counter. She had been at that counter 22 years and knew the filing history of this county the way some people know scripture. I requested a certified copy of all instruments recorded against parcel 31004100017 since 2015. She pulled it without comment. When she handed it across the counter, she looked at me for a moment, not with pity, not with curiosity, with the particular attention of someone who has seen enough documents to know when one of them is heavy. Then she said, almost to herself, anytime a lease assignment gets recorded without all co-owner signatures, I always wonder who's going to be the one to find it. She turned back to her filing. I walked back upstairs. Here is what I found in order. Piece 1, the lease assignment, filed the 14th of March 2018, my signature absent. Under West Virginia Code Section 3611, a lease of interest in jointly held real property requires the signature of all co-owners. The document had been recorded anyway. This could be argued by someone creative as a clerical oversight. Piece 2, Briar Ridge Holdings, LLC, incorporated the 28th of February, 2018, 14 days before the lease was signed. Brody as sole member and registered agent. 6 annual reports filed since. The LLC had received $8,200 per year for 6 years from Allegheny Gas Partners. Total paid into that LLC, $49,200. Not to the property owners of record, not to me, to a company my brother had set up 2 weeks before a lease that required my signature and didn't have it. Piece 3, my grandfather's deed, Exhibit A, the buyout provision. 7 consecutive years of tax payments by a co-owner establishes the right to buy out the other party's interest at fair market value. I had completed year 7 in November 2023. 14 months before that Wednesday morning, I had the right. I hadn't known I had it, because knowing I had it would have required someone to tell me the full picture, and someone had decided years ago that I didn't need the full picture. Now, I want to tell you something I've spent a long time sitting with, because I think it matters. I knew something was wrong at that Easter dinner in 2021. I heard it in my father's voice when he said, "Time's enough." I felt it when my mother didn't look up. I chose not to act, not because I was stupid, not because I was weak, because I had spent 34 years inside a family where my role was to be the capable one, the one who managed, who fixed, who paid, who never required managing herself. And somewhere in all those years, I had confused times being depended on, times being loved. And I thought if I kept paying, kept showing up, kept being the person they could count on, eventually the accounting would balance. It doesn't work that way. I'm not saying this to excuse what they did. What they did is in the public record. It has dates and dollar amounts and a signature line where my name should be. I'm saying it because the most important thing I did in this whole story wasn't confronting my family. It was sitting in my apartment on a February night with a certified copy of a lease assignment on my kitchen table and finally deciding to stop lying to myself about what I already knew. 3 weeks after that Wednesday, on a Thursday evening, I was at the Monongalia County Public Library on Spruce Street, not because I needed library resources, but because it was a neutral space and I needed 2 hours away from every room my family had ever been in. I had been there 40 minutes when I heard someone say my name, Dale Pritchard, mid-50s, gray sport coat. He worked for Allegheny Gas Partners. His name was on the lease. We had crossed paths at the courthouse years before, routine permit submissions. We exchanged pleasantries. Then he said, almost as an aside, "I think your family's parcel is coming up for renewal soon." "I know," I said. He looked at me. "Any concerns about the arrangement?" "Some questions about the original filing," I said. He nodded slowly. Then, and I believe he said it to protect himself, not to help me, he said, "We always request full co-owner authorization on these agreements. Whatever paperwork we received at signing, we took in good faith." He walked away. I sat very still. He had just told me his company's own policy required my signature, and they had proceeded without it because someone had told them I consented. I thought about my mother's call in September 2017. "Do you want to be involved?" And 3 days later, "Dad already signed. It's done, honey." She had used that call. She had used the fact that I'd said times I need to think about it times as evidence that I had been consulted, that I had been given the opportunity and declined. I drove home. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought, there's an occasion already on the calendar. I don't need to create a scene. I just need to show up to the one that already exists. In 3 weeks, my parents were hosting the 40-year anniversary of the family farm, a picnic on the land itself. My mother had asked me to come early to help set up and take photographs. Dale Pritchard had been invited as a friend of the business. I said yes. In the weeks between that decision and the picnic, I went to work every day. I ran my audits. I stopped at tutors on Fridays. I called my mother on Sundays and talked for 12 minutes. I also opened a savings account at a credit union on University Avenue, not my regular bank, somewhere new. I transferred $4,200 into it, not for a lawsuit, not for revenge, because I had been paying into a future that kept getting rearranged without my input. And I needed one account, one small container of money that existed for reasons that had nothing to do with my family. I was building something for myself regardless of outcome. That mattered to me more than I expected it to. There was one moment the mask almost slipped. My mother called on a Wednesday to remind me about the picnic and asked if I could pick up 2 bags of ice on the way. I said yes. She said, "You're such a good girl, Deirdre." She meant it. That warmth was real. That's the part I had to sit with the longest. The land looked the way it always looked in early September, goldenrod up along the fencing, the Chestnut Ridge tree line starting to turn, that smell of dry grass and something almost cold coming off the ridge. My grandfather had loved this place with the unsentimental love of someone who had earned it. I arrived at 11:15. The picnic was at noon. There were fold-out tables under the pavilion my father had built at the south end of the property. A cooler, Gail, and Pete Huffman, who had known my grandfather since before my father was grown. Dale Pritchard in his gray sport coat at the far table. Brody standing with a red plastic cup, talking to Pete with the easy confidence of a man who has never worried about what a room knows. I put the ice in the cooler. My mother hugged me. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," I said. The accordion file was in my car, in my work bag, in the trunk. I had not brought it to the table. I didn't need to bring it to the table. There was a calm in me that I hadn't expected. Not the calm of someone suppressing something, the calm of a decision already made, the stillness that comes after the hard part, not before it. We ate. My father told a story about my grandfather breaking ground on this land in 1962 with a borrowed tractor. Gail Huffman said she remembered. Pete asked about the gas company, casually, genuinely curious, and my father said it had worked out well. Brody refilled his cup. Then my mother, with the particular brightness she used for pivots, looked at me and said, "Deirdre, honey, I was thinking, now that the lease renewal is coming up, maybe we should get you properly added to the paperwork." Properly? The table went quiet for one beat. I looked at her. "What does properly mean?" I said, "Well, officially." She smiled. "We always meant to include you." She was offering me something in front of witnesses to preempt whatever she thought was coming. She had read the situation. She was trying to get ahead of it. "Mom," I said, "I've been on the deed of record since 2015. I'm already on the paperwork." "Of course. I mean the lease assignment," I said. "Recorded the 14th of March, 2018, with Allegheny Gas Partners. The one with Dad's signature and yours, without mine." The Huffmans went still. Dale Pritchard set his cup down. My father looked at me. Not the flat, assessing look from Easter dinner, something different. Something I had not seen before on his face. Brody was looking at the table. "That was just how it was set up," my mother said. Her voice had changed. "Careful now, precise. You were busy. We didn't want to complicate things for you." I was a property tax auditor. I said, at a county records office, "You didn't want to complicate things for me by telling me about a lease agreement on property I co-own." It wasn't that simple. Under West Virginia Code 3611, I said, "A lease of interest in jointly held real property requires the signature of all co-owners to be legally enforceable." My signature is not on that document. That document was recorded anyway. My mother looked at my father. My father did not look at her. The company, Dale Pritchard said, from the far table, not looking at anyone, his voice quiet and careful. We always request full co-owner authorization. At signing, we were told all parties were in agreement. My mother turned back to me. Deirdre, you said you needed to think about it. That was not a signature, I said. Silence. Briar Ridge Holdings, LLC, I said, incorporated the 28th of February 2018, 14 days before the lease was signed, registered agent Brody Allen Calloway. My brother had not moved. 6 payments, I said, at $8,200 each. $49,200 paid into that LLC over 6 years. Not to the property owners of record, not to me, to a company I was never told existed. Deirdre. My mother's voice cracked, just slightly. You have to understand, we didn't think you wanted to be involved in land decisions. You always said you had enough going on. I said that once, I said. In 2017, when you called me to ask a question that had already been answered. Gail Huffman pushed her chair back from the table. Not standing, just distance. My father still hadn't turned around. He was looking at the goldenrod along the fence line, at the hill behind the tree break, at something far enough away that it didn't require him to be in the conversation. And then my mother said something I don't think she planned to say. Something that came up from a place deeper than the prepared conversation she had been rehearsing. She said, "Your father was always afraid you'd leave, like Patrice did." The table went completely silent. Patrice, my father's younger sister, she had moved to Seattle in 1989 and come back twice in 30 years. I looked at my father. His jaw moved once. He still didn't turn around, but something in his shoulders changed. Something very small, very specific, like a held breath finally released. And in that moment, I understood the full architecture of it, not the money, the logic underneath the money. If I didn't know about the arrangement, I had no reason to dispute it. If I had no reason to dispute it, I had no reason to leave. If they kept me in the dark, they kept me attached to the land, to the family, to the version of myself who paid and showed up and didn't ask the questions that would force a reckoning. They hadn't thought of it in those terms. I'm almost certain of that. My mother believed she was protecting me from complexity. My father believed he was making a practical decision about land management. My brother told himself he had earned it by staying when I hadn't. None of them had sat down and thought, let's deceive Deirdre. They had simply, each independently, found it convenient to let me not know. And convenience, repeated over years, becomes structure. That is not cruelty in the way we recognize cruelty. It is something quieter and more durable. It is the specific damage done by people who love you in a way that requires you to stay manageable. I looked at my mother. I completed 7 consecutive years of tax payments in November 2023. I said, under the terms of Exhibit A in my grandfather's deed of record, I am entitled to exercise a buyout of the co-ownership interest at assessed fair market value. I intend to do that. Deirdre, I'm not asking permission. I said, I'm informing you. I looked at Dale Pritchard. I'll be in touch with your legal department regarding the lease's enforceability. Given the missing signature, I'd recommend your company consult its own counsel before the renewal date. He nodded. Once. Very slightly. I looked at Brody. He was still looking at the table. He looked in that moment like a man who had known this day was somewhere on the calendar and had spent 3 years just not looking at that particular month. I looked at my mother. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not weak, smaller. The way people look when the story they've been telling themselves stops being large enough to live inside. I love you, I said, to both of them. Because I did, and because I was not going to lie about that to make the rest of it cleaner. Then I picked up my keys and walked back to my car. If you've ever had to say something true out loud to someone who needed you to stay silent, drop a comment. I want to hear from you. That night, I drove home and sat at my kitchen table without turning on a light for a long time. I wasn't crying. I wasn't relieved exactly. I was tired in a very specific way. The tiredness of something put down that you've been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. The absence of the weight doesn't feel like freedom right away. It just feels like absence. And you have to get used to that before it can feel like anything else. The green pen was on the table. I didn't remember bringing it home. I must have dropped it in my bag at the office without thinking. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I opened my work bag and pulled out the buyout notice I had drafted 3 weeks earlier with an attorney in Fairmont, not Morgantown, somewhere my family didn't know the firm. I had signed it once in pencil as a draft. I hadn't signed the final copy yet. I picked up the pen. I signed it. That was the first thing I had ever signed related to that land where I was the one with something to gain, not something to give. My signature looked exactly the same as it always did. It took about 3 seconds. I put the signed copy in an envelope, set it by the door to mail in the morning. Then I went to bed. That was 14 months ago. The buyout is in process. Real estate law in West Virginia moves at its own pace, and there are title questions and competing assessments. And the unresolved matter of an LLC formed 14 days before a lease that was missing a required signature. My attorney tells me it's complicated. I've been working with complicated documents for 8 years. I know how to wait. My mother still calls on Sundays, not always at exactly 2 p.m. anymore. The timing has gotten looser since September, like something that was held in a very tight shape has been released a little. We talk. It is careful in a way it wasn't before. It is also more honest than it has ever been, which I think is the same thing at this particular stage. My father and I have not spoken directly about what happened at the picnic. I don't know if we will. He is not a man who revisits things. I have stopped waiting for the conversation that might explain everything because I no longer believe that conversation is what I actually need. Brody and I haven't spoken since September. That may be permanent. I don't know yet. I've stopped making decisions about things I don't know yet. The savings account at the credit union on University Avenue has $7,340 in it now. Not a large amount by anyone's measure, but every dollar in it is a dollar I put there for a future. I am designing myself from the inside with full information. That is new. I am still learning what to do with it. I still stop at Tudor's on Fridays. I still drive down High Street past the courthouse. Paulette is still at the records counter, and we still talk about the filing backlog and WVU football and the weather. We have never discussed what she said that morning in February. We don't need to. It was enough that she said it, and I was standing there to hear it, and I finally chose to listen. The green pen is still on my desk at the office. Still no cap. Still runs fine. I use it every day to sign my name to things that are in every way that matters. Mine. One day it will run out of ink. When it does, I'll replace it. That's all. I'm 36 years old. I spent 8 years reading other people's records with precision and care. I spent 7 years choosing not to read my own. I'm not doing that anymore. That's what this year has been. That is the whole of it. Thank you for staying. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There's more to tell. I'd rather tell it to people who are paying attention.